Hi. Oh, it is May 16, 2021. Okay, I posted this video last night. Prepare for what is coming in next few months. Agendas in overdrive. And I believe I said in this video that Trump supporters, conservatives, and also anyone who speaks the truth and doesn't go along with the official narrative, but conservatives and Trump supporters are being targeted. They are the right-wing extremists, the domestic terrorists, because of that January 6th insurrection. Well, it's unfortunate that we have so many Americans who don't think anymore, and their brains have been taken over by mainstream media. Mainstream media, in particular, the left. Mainstream media on the left. You know, the NPRs, the CNNs, the MSNBCs, the ABC, NBC, CBS. Yeah, all of them. And unfortunately, that includes outlets like The Intercept, outlets like Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman. All right. So, in the video that I posted, apparently, no one could hear the video of Laura Ingraham interviewing Glenn Greenwald and two reporters that are targeted by The Intercept. So I'm going to play that video because others have asked. Whoa, hang on. Well, I apologize for the pause. If you heard my cat sounding like there was going to be a cat fight, the main cat, or the cat from the main house came down. Anyway, all right, so for some reason this didn't play. I hope it plays in this video. And I'm playing it because it's important to see how many are setting up as targets for violence others. In this case, it's journalists and reporters. Here it is.
Actually effective when left-wing media entities start attacking you and lying about your work. That's when. And that's what's happening to video journalists and regular guests of this show, Julio Rosas and Jorge Ventura. For the crime of accurately covering the BLM and Antifa riots over the last year, they're now being smeared by The Intercept. The once credible outlet didn't just put out a lengthy hit piece, they also released this shameful video.
Rosas and Ventura are not household names, but it's important to understand their reporting because they're members of an informal club of right-wing reporters who roam from city to city, feeding the conservative media's hunger for images of destruction and violence on the margins of left-wing protests.
Now, the two men name-checked there, Julio Rosas, townhall.com senior writer, and Jorge Ventura, Daily Caller field reporter, join me now. Julio, why did they feel the need to come after you both at this point?
Well, I mean, obviously they didn't appreciate the fact that myself and Jorge actually reported on these riots that happened last year. And it just so happened that the groups that were rioting often were either Black Lives Matter or Antifa or some amalgamation of the hard left. And so I was actually kind of surprised something didn't happen like this sooner in terms of, smearing our work. And look, I stand by it. I have no regrets. And, it's not our fault that most of the people that were rioting either, last year, or even a little bit into this year, were of those types of groups. And so, I'm going to continue covering riots. And personally, I don't care who it is. I just have a passion for doing it. And I'm going to continue to do it.
Now, Jorge, The Intercept took particular issue with your decision to move locations during unrest in Philadelphia. Watch.
Julio Rosas, Jorge Ventura, Shelby Talcott, Richie McGinnis, and Elijah Schaefer were all on hand as protesters rallied peacefully at a park in West Philadelphia and then marched to a police station. There were minor skirmishes in West Philadelphia, but by then the riot squad had left the protest and driven across the city to cover a more telegenic scene, the mass looting of a shopping center 10 miles away.
Jorge, they seem to want to protect a narrative here that there just is no looting or rioting, just a few skirmishes, and that you're trying to exaggerate it all for a dramatic effect.
Well, the first rule of journalism is to hold, the powerful accountable and tell stories that are being untold. And when this unrest happened in Philadelphia and the mass looting did occur, we just did our jobs as a reporter and just reported the news. So it seems like now just reporting the news is a crime. And this hit piece had no facts. They didn't even have the decency to reach out to any of us for comment. And what's not talked about enough is, in these riots and these civil unrests, the communities that are most affected are just working class, regular Americans and black and brown communities. These riots are not happening, in Malibu and Calabasas. These are happening in areas where it's working class, regular Americans, and no one was telling these stories. And it took a lot of courage from all of us to be on the ground. It takes a lot of risk. And the whole piece, there was no facts. And like I said, they didn't even reach out for comment, not even decency for that.
First of all, that guy, whoever he was, looked really creepy, okay? I didn't know. Maybe he just was very odd. But this is, I've got to say, this is just, to me, an example of how low and how it's unimportant the so-called, media really is today. I mean, where are they? Why aren't they covering this? I mean, they're all covering January 6th and as if it's happening every day. But, Julio, why don't they ever show up at these events? Where are they?
Well, that's kind of the question, right? I mean, we became kind of a riot squad because we became friends because we were always going to these locations, and it's also a safety and numbers aspect because obviously these are very hostile situations that we find ourselves in. So it's nice to have somebody that's close by that and can trust. And so, yeah, and it fell to like the 5 or 6 of us to cover the whole country when we were going through this very chaotic time. I mean, we were beating out news agencies that had a lot more manpower and a lot more resources than either Daily Caller or Town Hall or even the independent guys. And so that's why we appreciate, Fox News allowing us to showcase our reporting because we were often on the front lines. I mean, the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting is a prime example where it was literally the 5 of us and there was no major news outlets at that time. And so in that example, we would have a much harder picture of what went on if it wasn't for our cameras. And so, I mean, as opposed to why aren't they there? Well, clearly because they have a narrative of that, BLM didn't riot. But I mean, they did. And so that's just really unfortunate that it had to fall to the 5 or 6 or 7 of us.
Julio and Jorge, thank you for keeping it real, and please keep it up. By the way, Glenn Greenwald co-founded The Intercept, leaving just last October, and I thought it was important to bring him on tonight to see what he thinks of his former publication, what it's become, specifically targeting these 5 individuals. Glenn, there are a lot of deficiencies, mistruths, misreporting in this piece, but there's something more worrisome here, and that's why they chose to publish this. Is this an attempt to chill independent reporting?
I think it's 2 things. So first of all, when I was at The Intercept, I used to, and still do, follow both of their reporting because there's very little of it, as they said, about Antifa and Black Lives Matters and the rioting and damage they do because big media outlets are petrified to report on it because they'll be accused by their own journalists of being racist or fascist or sympathizers to white nationalism. And so it's left to them in order to do it. So then The Intercept steps in for 2 reasons. Number one, Antifa regularly attacks journalists physically. They assault them. I formed a press freedom group with Edward Snowden, Daniel Ellsberg, and several other people, and we track it all the time. Antifa constantly attacks violently journalists who cover their riots. This was an attempt to put Jorge and Julio in particular, their faces out there to incite and encourage Antifa to attack them so that they can no longer do their jobs safely. The other aspect of it, Laura, is that digital outlets, these millennial digital liberal outlets like The Intercept, like BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, so many of them, they think that if you're a conservative, you're not really a journalist. They think that you're part of this crypto-fascist movement, that you're the enemy. And so they don't regard Julio and Jorge as journalists, even though they're doing way better journalism than The Intercept on these issues. They see them as the enemy, which is why they did this kind of article, dragging their faces into the light in order to endanger them.
Robert Mackey from The Intercept gave up the game, I think, on why they published. Watch.
While the Riot Squad video journalists are still mostly unknown to people who are not addicted to Fox News, some of their faces have become familiar to left-wing activists. That's also prompted hundreds of supporters of the racial justice movement to live stream protests themselves, creating a real-time record of events that can be used to counter distortions coming from the right.
I love the dramatic music, Glenn. Remember what happened to Andy No? He was beaten, had a brain bleed out on the West Coast when they recognized him. And heaven forbid this happen again. Maybe if we have unrest, heaven forbid this summer.
That was the point of the Intercept video. That guy, Robert Mackey, he says in the video, it's the most hilarious but also repellent thing. I have covered the Arab Spring and arrest in Iran, and you know how he covered it? By sitting on his couch live blogging it and aggregating tweets. He's not a journalist at all. He's angry that people like Julio and Jorge have the courage to actually go on the ground and do risky journalism, something that most people at The Intercept and other digital outlets like it, millennials, would never do. They think mean tweets are traumatizing, much less putting yourself in risky situations. So I do think it's very important to understand what's going on here, which is that these outlets look at themselves as operatives on behalf of these movements. You can think that these movements, Black Lives Matter or whatever, have a just cause, but your job as a journalist is to inform the public of the damage that's left. But just like Jorge said, the damage is happening in working class and minority neighborhoods, not in the rich, white, liberal neighborhoods in Brooklyn, in San Francisco, and Los Angeles, where these journalists live, and therefore they just don't care and they don't want it reported.
Mm-hmm. Glenn, thank you so much.
Okay, so, one side targeting the other side. And yes, it is true. It is virtually always the left targeting the right. Okay, so what do I come across last night right after I post that video? U.S. warns extremists may strike as virus restrictions ease. Okay, I think that this summer is just going to be, unfortunately, quite violent, bloody. You know, I've been coming across these headlines for months. It's been kind of ongoing since January 6th, that insurrection. But also, the police in cities across U.S. brace for a violent summer. Lifting of COVID-19 restrictions, rising gun purchases, equal violent summer. Okay. Keep everybody in their homes, right? Implement curfews and restrictions and close down businesses and make everybody go online, as the police state did last year. Well, I think we're going to be seeing more and more curfews and restrictions, and it may not have anything to do with COVID. It may have everything to do with the violence that, well, considering everything, I'd say it's a guarantee. Portland Police Union president says city is on the precipice of a gang war. I don't know how you guys do it in Portland. I do not know how you are managing all of these riots, the Antifa thugs that have you had a break one day maybe of peace in Portland? So a gang war? We need to talk about the elephant in the room, gun violence. We are on the precipice of a gang war. So, gangs, huh? And, you know, it's funny. We have many gang members crossing the border. We've got MS-13. We've got gangs up the wazoo here in our country. But police in the state's largest city had responded to 357 shootings as of May 9, an increase of over 100% from the same time last year. Both shootings and murders skyrocketing. This is happening in all cities, by the way. But defund the police. That's a brilliant answer, isn't it? And all those leftists who are calling for defunding the police, and then the city councils or the town councils, or they actually defund the police. Those leftists in those cities hire security for themselves. The same thing with the squad in Congress, AOC and all the others. Yeah, they are literally rendering you vulnerable while they hire at taxpayer expense security for their own self. Unbelievably stupid are we. So the city has yet to bring back the gun violence reduction team in Portland. The city council cutting money from the police force in 2020. And I've read other articles about this. The gun violence reduction team apparently was quite successful in keeping gun violence down. Well, it's up. And city council, well, they still are focused on making additional cuts to your police in Portland, and they're ignoring this team, this gun violence reduction team. Okay. When it's clear that the so-called elected officials are not implementing policies or programs that are not in your best interest, it's time to get rid of them. Don't wait to vote them out. That has been a major failing. You know, Americans, they think their vote. Oh, we're going to vote you out. They don't care anymore because they don't care about you. They're implementing agendas to bring in this New World Order, this Agenda 2030, the technocratic tyranny that is just going to be complete and utter hell. So I do want to get back to this article, though, because as I was reading it last night, I thought, how many times are you going to say racial or ethnic, domestic terrorist, domestic extremist? Listen to this. Okay, so, all right. A national terrorism alert that the Department of Homeland Security, they actually had an alert right after January 6th. That alert ended yesterday. Oh, but the new alert started today. Isn't that interesting? We will forever be living the war on terrorism. So the alert does not cite any specific threats, but it warns of potential danger from an increasingly complex and volatile mix that includes domestic terrorists inspired by various grievances, racial or ethnic hatred, and influences from abroad. Wow. Threats were exacerbated by COVID-19, which spawned conspiracy theories and deepened anger at the government in some quarters over the shutdown of the economy. Well, when you destroy somebody's business and leave them destitute, people get angry. They don't necessarily become domestic terrorists, but perhaps they begin to look into what our government is doing. See, our government is actually the domestic terrorist, but Americans, I don't want to throw too much at you. You just keep thinking it's, the Trump supporters. My God. All right. Yeah. As virus conditions improve, the alert says new dangers loom. Notice how you don't get any evidence. Violent extremists may seek to exploit the easing of COVID-19 related restrictions across the United States. That's right. Now, anybody who's been following this, those domestic terrorists that they're talking about, well, they come from that event, January 6. So they're the Trump supporters, the Republicans, the conservatives. Yeah, you ease the restrictions, and that's, oh my God, Trump supporters are just going to go wild and start, I don't know, engaging in terrorism. If anybody would, and I'm a former Democrat, if anyone would engage, it's the left, not the right. It's the liberals, not the conservatives. It's the Democrats, it's not the Republicans. I came out of my liberal Democrat bubble and began to see, the Republicans seem to be much more mature. You can actually engage in conversation with them. They don't go wild when you don't agree with certain, of their points. Not true on the left side. So, yes, violent extremists. They're going to exploit the easing of the restrictions to conduct attacks against a broader range of targets after previous public capacity limits reduced opportunities for lethal attacks. Extremists motivated by racial and ethnic hatred have targeted religious institutions and businesses or gatherings. Now, who might that be? Well, racial and ethnic hatred, I would say it's BLM. Oh, no. It's the Trump supporters because they're the white supremacists. Oh, wait, it's all white Americans because, well, the color of our skin dictates, I guess, our hatred. Okay. National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin issued by the Department of Homeland Security is an extension of one issued earlier this year in the wake of the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol. That alert expired Saturday. Or who knows, maybe it's next Saturday. But hey, an alert will always be in place. It reflects a sense of anxiety over domestic extremists. I don't feel anxious. Do you feel anxious? I don't. I would think that those who are lying through their teeth about all of this, they feel anxious. So there's a sense of anxiety over those domestic extremists, particularly those motivated by racial and ethnic hatred over and over and over again, that has been building for months. Wow, they must be tracking, spying on, listening to, watching all of those domestic extremists to know that they've been motivated by the racial and ethnic hatred, and it's been building for months. Our intelligence agencies are just so exceptional. And it was actually even under the previous administration, with repeated warnings from Department of Homeland Security and the Justice Department. Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Russia, China, Iran, amplifying, all those countries are amplifying conspiracy theories about the origins of COVID-19 and calls for violence against people of Asian descent. Today's terrorism-related threat landscape is more complex, more dynamic, and more diversified than it was several years ago. You do get, they're not talking about BLM. They're not talking about Antifa. They are talking about the conservatives. Once again here, racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists. You know, and I think of all of the Republicans I know, I can't think of one who's violent. Not one. And not one filled with this racial or ethnic hatred. Can't think of one. But you know what? I can think of several on the left side, those former friends of mine. Lingering potential for violence from people motivated by anti-government sentiment after Biden's election, suggesting the January 6 riot at the Capitol may have emboldened extremists and set the stage for additional attacks. Noting online calls for violence against politicians, law enforcement, and government buildings. That, to me, sounds like Antifa and BLM. Department of Homeland Security, FBI, are providing guidance and other assistance to state and local law enforcement organizations to deal with the threat. Yes, Homeland Security has also established a new domestic terrorism branch within its Office of Intelligence and Analysis, and has directed state and local governments to use 7.5% of annual grant money issued by the agency to deal with the threat. It's a threat, it's a threat, it's a threat. It's racial and ethnic hatred that's going to spawn racial and ethnic violence. And yeah, who does that sound like? Antifa and BLM. But then I came across this today. Department of Homeland Security offers $500,000 for public-private data sweep targeting violent extremists in law enforcement. Homeland Security to share harvested data with peers, teachers, community leaders, and law enforcement in whole of society prevention network. Stasi America. Welcome to your new country. Do you like it? 500,000 from a grant, Insider Threats to American Law Enforcement. Due to the growing number of threats our nation is combating, the grant synopsis explains the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate supports the evolving threat landscape of a dynamic world with changing motivations, actors, communication models, and weaponry. You know, people are still asking questions about, well, can you define extremist? What does it mean to be an extremist? They've told us for years and years the extremists are those who speak the truth, those who, want the Constitution implemented, those who are against the crossing of the border illegally, conservatives, Trump supporters, pretty much everyone that does not go along with the official narrative, the dissidents. You know, you have a Ron Paul bumper sticker on your car. Well, you could be a potential extremist. The data collection here that they will be doing and hiring, you know, it's a public-private partnership, but the recruitment of virtually anyone to get online and whatever they deem to be a potentially violent person, they report. This is so dangerous. The research and data collected under the grant is to be shared with a variety of agencies, including private organizations. Oh, yet civil rights and liberties will not be violated? Oh, wow. Okay, good. So you trust your government, right? Civil rights and liberties will not be violated in the combined public-private harvesting and sharing of data about undefined extremists. The Department of Homeland Security insists knowledge and findings from this research will be transferred to federal, state, local, and private organizations to enable education and awareness to reinforce a whole of society prevention architecture. Oh, that, I guess, is part of the infrastructure, while respecting civil rights and civil liberties. How do you harvest data without people knowing that their data is being harvested without infringing on their rights and their liberties? Oh, well, the thinking, I guess, stops with most Americans when they read this. These prevention efforts will equip and empower local efforts, including peers, teachers, community leaders, and law enforcement, to minimize the threat as it evolves while enhancing emergency preparedness and response. Pre-crime, right there. Yeah. The pre-crime red guards, brown shirts. You know, denying reality leads to tyranny and societal failure. I'm not even going to read this article because I was a little disappointed with it, but that's true. How many people do you know that literally work at denying reality? Because it does take work now, because everything has become so obvious. We are not a free country. We are already a tyranny, and it's only getting worse, and it's only cementing itself every single day as we sit and do nothing. So these articles, the violent extremists, the new domestic terrorism branch of the Department of Homeland Security. I guess Americans, they really do want tyranny, and they don't want to be free, and they want to just continue to listen to lies and accept them. That is the height of laziness and immaturity. You know, Glenn Greenwald he posted an article, and it's very good indeed. The false and exaggerated claims still being spread about the Capitol riot. Insisting on factual accuracy does not make one an apologist for the protesters. False reporting is never justified, especially to inflate threat and fear levels. The false reporting on what took place on January 6th is sickening. It continues. But what does it enable them to do, this false reporting? It enables them to target one specific group, those on the right. This is very dangerous. So I will link below. You can read this. There is no circumstance or motive that justifies the dissemination of false claims by journalists. The most significant of these falsehoods came about with the Capitol police officer Brian Sicknick, who was murdered. This is what mainstream media replayed. This is the narrative. Murdered by the pro-Trump mob when they beat him to death with a fire extinguisher. New York Times, January 8, in an article headlined, Capitol police officer dies from injuries in pro-Trump rampage. A second New York Times article from later that day. bearing the most dramatic headline, he dreamed of being a police officer, then was killed by a pro-Trump mob. And, of course, they elaborate. Here, by saying struck him in the head with a fire extinguisher. According to 2 law enforcement officials, with a bloody gash in his head, Mr. Sicknick was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support. Wow. It became arguably the single most emphasized and known story of this event. And yeah, understandably so, because it was so dramatic. It was savage. It was barbaric. It was horrifying, but it was untrue. Took such importance. Sicknick's death was the only example the media had of the pro-Trump mob deliberately killing anyone. 5 people died on that day at the Capitol. None of the other 4 deaths were at the hands of the protesters. The only other person killed with deliberate violence was a pro-Trump protester, Ashley Babbitt, unarmed, one shot by a police officer at close range. The other 3 deaths, Kevin Greason died of a heart attack outside the Capitol. Benjamin Phillips, the founder of a pro-Trump website called Trumparoo, who died of a stroke that day. Roseanne Boylan, a fanatical Trump supporter who, The Times says, was inadvertently killed in a crush of fellow rioters during their attempt to fight through a police line. I'm not even sure that's true, but why the fire extinguisher story became so vital? It was the most violent and menacing story. Without Sicknick having his skull bashed in with a fire extinguisher, there were no deaths that day that could be attributed to deliberate violence by pro-Trump protesters. Sicknick was the only person killed who was not a pro-Trump protester, and who knows if that's actually true. He was a police officer, but he could have been a pro-Trump he could have been a Trump supporter. Hard to overstate how pervasive this fire extinguisher story became. Major media outlets, mainstream journalists used this story to dramatize what happened. Hit in the head, Associated Press. Richard Engel offers Sicknick clubbed to death with a fire extinguisher. Fred Wellman, member of the mob, encouraged by Hawley, killed him with a fire extinguisher. Nicholas Kristof, clubbed to death with a fire extinguisher by Trump mob. Television host, gravely intoned, oh, of course, Mr. CIA, Anderson Cooper. After the media bombarded Americans with this story for a full month without pause, it took center stage at Trump's impeachment process. As former federal prosecutor Andrew McCarthy noted, the article of impeachment itself stated Trump supporters injured and killed law enforcement personnel. The House impeachment managers explicitly claimed on page 28 of their pre-trial memorandum that the insurrectionists killed a Capitol police officer by striking him in the head with a fire extinguisher. Once the impeachment trial ended in an acquittal, Biden issued a statement and referenced this claim to the very first paragraph. Sicknick, said the president, lost his life while protecting the Capitol from a violent, riotous mob on January 6. The problem with this story, it is false in all respects. From the start, there was almost no evidence to substantiate it. The only basis were the 2 original New York Times articles asserting that this happened based on the claim of anonymous law enforcement officers. Oh, mainstream media is just filled with these anonymous sources. that they make up, despite this alleged brutal murder taking place in one of the most surveilled buildings on the planet, filled that day with hundreds of cell phones taping the events. Nobody saw a video of it. No photographs depicted it. To this day, no autopsy report has been released. No details from any official source have been provided. So, you just accept everything that mainstream media says. They provide you no evidence. Hello, most Americans. Are you really that brain dead? They are lying through their teeth, but they knew they were lying. The same day the Times reported that story, an outlet interviewed Sicknick's brother, who said that Sicknick had texted the family Wednesday night to say that while he had been pepper sprayed, he was in good spirits. Other stories have said that he didn't know where the pepper spray came from. It could have come from police officers. So, okay, no one at the New York Times thought to verify. Oh, of course not, because it was a story, fictitious, but it worked for the agenda. And you know what the sad part is? No one can question anything without getting slammed. And only liars slam when you confront them with the truth. And the truth is that even his mother, Brian Sicknick's mother, has said she believed that her son died of a fatal stroke, not a fire extinguisher to the head. All right. I don't know how to get people to stop, just believing with blind faith that mainstream media is telling the truth. But this has become so dangerous now and so obvious. That's why it's so sickening. It's so obvious that they are not telling you the truth, that they have an agenda, and they keep putting out these narratives to achieve their agenda. Oh, sure, Americans feel that Americans are good people and they would never lie like this. Oh, please shatter that delusion in your head. And there's more. Here. What about the okay, I came across this, and that's what prompted all of these other articles that I wanted to show you. FBI reclassifies a 2017 shooting incident. I'm sure a lot of you remember Steve Scalise. Okay, the FBI said it was suicide by cop. The shooter. It was his desire to commit suicide by cop. That was in 2017. It's only been in the last couple of days that the FBI has reclassified it. Now, we're talking FBI here. We're talking, USA, exceptional. FBI, 2017, suicide by cop. I guess the shooting of Scalise was irrelevant. Just shoot anybody, right? And the police will shoot you at a baseball game. So how is it that the FBI came up with suicide by cop and then 4 years later decide, I think he was a domestic terrorist? Our intelligence and law enforcement apparatuses require accuracy, precision, and justice. I'm encouraged that the FBI has updated its classification of that nearly catastrophic event to reflect the actual motives of the assailant, and I commend Director Ray for his oversight of that correction. He was a domestic violent extremist going after a Republican. Steve Scalise was a Republican, right? Yes, I believe he was. Oh my God, you mean domestic extremists actually go after Republicans as well? Okay. What happened? How did they... Well, I guess because of this representative Brad Wenstrup. He was persistent in getting the FBI to actually reclassify accurately what was going on that day and who the shooter really was. So if the FBI does this, then what do you think our mainstream media is like? Fact. Claim about FBI official said Bureau recovered no guns at Capitol riot on January 6. Oh, it's missing context. So, Jill Sanborn, assistant director of the FBI's counterterrorism division, told a Senate committee that the FBI did not recover any guns at the January 6 Capitol riot. She's the assistant director of the counterterrorism division. That's what she said to a Senate committee. But, hey, USA Today is going to put it in context and make it right. Yeah. Law enforcement said they had guns. Rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6 to try to prevent Congress from counting electoral votes, well, they came with baseball bats, brought zip cuffs, used flagpoles to break into the building. All of that was the dramatic flair of those bought and paid for Americans to do all of this kind of stuff. Now, I watched a video early on, right after this event, and a son and a mother were walking through the Capitol, and they actually saw a whole bunch of zip cuffs just, laying on the floor. They brought it to the Capitol Police. Yeah, these are really violent terrorists. But of course, okay, you go to PolitiFact and get your truth there. Ron Johnson, the January 6 Capitol riot didn't seem like an armed insurrection. Oh, but yes, PolitiFact says yes, it was. There you go. You don't have to have any kind of cognitive dissonance, you leftist, crazy people who have no brain anymore, because you can just go to these sites and be made right again. Get out of your dissonance, because it's too uncomfortable. And, well, there's so many websites you can go to. How about Snopes? And here, NPR. Yes, Capitol rioters. They were armed. Yes, they were. And here are the weapons prosecutors say they used. Yeah, I'll believe those prosecutors. Yes, they were. Don't listen to the FBI, listen to NPR. So, federal official walks back allegation rioters intended to capture and assassinate. Well, let's walk that back, okay? Because it's not really true. A justice official in charge of the investigation into the Capitol riot said there was no direct evidence of that intent. Oh my God, AOC, she was so terrified. She wasn't even in the building, but hey, So terrified, she posts a Twitter video of her. I was behind a door and, my God, I thought I was going to die that day. Nancy Pelosi. Oh, they wanted to capture and assassinate me. They're lying through their teeth. No evidence. They demonstrate on a daily basis that they're batshit crazy. And you know, it's what it reflects is that the American people are batshit crazy. That's what it reflects. When you actually take batshit crazy at their word, it means something's wrong with you. Oh, man. Well, U.S. media reports of the invasion of the Capitol have contributed to the spread of hatred and fear. Great. They succeeded. The decline of journalism in America is made clear by the reporting of the attack, January 6th, because the reporting was atrocious. They were outright lying for an agenda. What's the agenda? To get rid of the conservatives, the Trump supporters, the Republican Party, as Biden said when he was asked by a reporter, are you going to run again? Well, I don't know, but I don't even know if there's going to be a Republican Party. That should freak all Americans out that a president could say that. There was a reason why he said it. And what do you hear? Crickets. Americans are brain dead. Most. So, if the left can create the narrative, the country is always under a threat, and that's what it creates. Ever since 9/11, we have never come out of the threat. It's either the ISIS or Al-Qaeda or domestic terrorists. When you have a lying government, and you have a mainstream media coming out saying that if you don't trust your government, there's something wrong with you, you know, you do not live in a healthy, free country. So, media will ignore, and still is ignoring, the sick Nick story. And no one spreads more disinformation than the media. Absolutely true. But still can't get a whole lot of Americans off mainstream media. Because mainstream media demands nothing of them except that they stay low and keep watching them. Mainstream media is making a complete and utter fool out of most Americans who believe they're horseshit. A fool you are. A dangerous fool. Considering the narratives that mainstream media put out. Oh, it's going to be a violent summer. It's not going to be the conservatives. It's not going to be the Republicans. And it's going to be our government, no doubt, BLM, Antifa. It's not going to be any of those Trump supporters or conservatives or conspiracy theorists or those who don't trust their government. The reason why a whole lot of people don't trust the government is because our government has been lying for decades. It's really important that people get that when people lie, they're not to be trusted. Unless, they work at getting your trust back by telling you the truth. But that doesn't happen. It's very clear to me that Americans are not well. They are not a well bunch. When you continually listen to liars, it means that you are in a very, very toxic relationship. most Americans, they don't know anything better. So, I'll link below to everything. Be careful. You know, be careful, because we're looking at we're already living insanity, but we are looking at insanity blown up to a point where it's going to be hard to maintain your own sanity. But I would suggest not getting caught up with anyone, certainly not strangers on the street, but you feel like your family, your friends are, kind of on that left side, believing all of the crap. Don't even get into it with them. Back off, because people are getting more and more violent. So, even those that you think you can trust, when they're pushed to the limit, when they're stressed, that's when you'll find out if you can actually trust them. Most people, when really stressed, or when confronted in a manner that reveals there might be something wrong with them, even if it's not, said in a way that something's wrong with you, but if they interpret it that way, if they have an emotional response to something that you're saying, a whole lot of people can become violent. And feelings. Well, we used to say feelings are not facts. Today, feelings are facts for an awful lot. So, it's a very demanding time. The truth demands an awful lot from us. The test of your own character, that's very demanding. But to stay aware of who is around you, your surroundings, all of this requires a whole new way of living. Depending on where you are in this country, will really depend on how much effort you have to put in to maintain your sanity, but also to kind of avoid any kind of insane and or insane violence from others. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, on that note, have a great day, guys. Ciao.